Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. It was a busy session with lots of business that is now beginning to play out before us. And notably, on the water issue, where I'd like to begin, we've got a ballot initiative coming up on Election Day. The legislature voted to create a funding mechanism to withdraw $2 billion from the Rainy Day Fund. Ironic that we're solving our water problems in part with the Rainy Day Fund. But only if the voters approve this funding mechanism. Senator Duncan, why did we decide to spend money out of the Rainy Day Fund as opposed to out of the state budget's general revenue, and what do you think will happen?
I think that's a good question, and there were several reasons. First is the fact that the Rainy Day Fund, or Economic Stabilization Fund, has actually grown exponentially because of the price of oil and gas and because of the ability for us to extract it through hydrofracking and new technologies. So we are, right now, we'll have about $6.1 billion in the Rainy Day Fund at the end of the year. The good news is that we're going to continue to put money in. So it's a good source of funding to solve the infrastructure problems that we have. There's another reason as well, is that when we pull it out of the Rainy Day Fund, it enabled us to deal with some issues that we were running up against the constitutional spending cap. And so this allowed us to be able to put more money into schools, put more money into transportation, and other infrastructure issues that we have in Texas.
Representative Frullo, procedurally, this was an opportunity to spend more than you thought you'd be able to spend based on the cap. But the reality is you could have chosen to take that money out of general revenue if you wanted to, and many of your colleagues in the House particularly were concerned that money coming out of the Rainy Day Fund for this purpose might not be the best idea.
Well, I think it is a good idea to take the money out of the Rainy Day Fund. Right now, that is not earning a very good return. Right now, what we're going to be able to do, assuming that the voters approve this, is take that money and put it into place where it can start being used to be seed money. It's an evergreen loan fund.
It'll be a revolving loan fund. People will apply with projects that they want to have funded in part by this money. They'll pay that money back.
Right, and then that will go and be used for projects again. So it's a great use of that money. One thing that puts it all in perspective is one of the Midwestern states had a billboard up that said, "Go ahead and move to Texas. In a few years, you'll be back here when they run out of water." We as legislators need to make sure that that doesn't happen.
And of course, we've come out, Representative Springer, we've come out of the worst one-year drought in the history of the state. We're back up above 90% drought conditions statewide. When it rains, people forget we have a problem. In fact, they'd be forgiven for thinking that we have a problem when they turn on their taps at home and water comes out, or they turn on their sprinklers and water comes out. Some part of the problem here may be convincing people that there even is a crisis.
Well, I think that's the biggest challenge we face on Prop 6 and getting the word out, especially with Houston having their mayoral election. We know they're going to have a turnout. I think, though, when I visit, especially the western half of my district, we absolutely understand we have a water problem. And I think just a little bit of rain that we've seen, nobody thinks that the drought's over.
Nobody's been fooled into thinking that
that's exactly right. And they know we have a situation that needs to be taken care of. I was with the Water Board last week in Austin, and there's a prime example of why we need to vote for Prop 6. The city of Rawls, just about 40 miles from where we sit today, needs to do $2 million of water works in their town. The best they can get financing is 3.65% as they go forward. If we pass Prop 6, they can qualify and go to AAA rating financing and go below 1%. That will save the ratepayers in the city of Rawls money. That's where it benefits rural Texas. So from Munster to Rawls, Dickens, all those towns will really benefit. And that's what the message I continue to push throughout my district of why we need to support Prop 6.
So we have 3 yes votes for Prop 6 up here on the stage.
Absolutely.
But you know, of course, that some of your colleagues and many people in the state have spoken up and said, we're not sure this is the right funding mechanism. Deborah Medina, the former Republican gubernatorial candidate, now running, at least for the moment, for comptroller as a Republican, is the head of an organization called Nix 6. And her point, and the point of her colleagues in that group, is this is an insider's play. Only the bankers and the financiers are going to benefit from this. The Water Development Board is an agency we don't know much about. We're giving all of our control to them. This is a mistake. Senator Duncan, do you think that we might see this ballot initiative go down on election day?
You know, it depends on who comes out and who votes.
Right.
I think the issue is we're going to always debate about how much money we need in the rainy day fund. I don't think anybody has the magic answer on that. It doesn't make sense, as Representative Frullo said, to hold a lot of money into that account where it earns no interest, where you can invest it in a revolving loan fund to be able to take care of infrastructure needs in water that are going to cost more as time goes on.
Right.
So, you know, I don't understand that argument as viable.
Yeah.
The issue that some people raise is about the new board.
Yeah.
And I think that will be something that we need to monitor closely, but I do believe that it is a better way to manage this fund than what we've had before.
But Representative Frullo, voter turnout in Texas is the lowest of any state. In fact, we're 51st out of 50. We're lower than the 49 states in Washington, D.C. in voter turnout. In an off-year election like this one, whereas Representative Springer says the mayor's race in Houston is the biggest thing on the ballot any place in the state, and it's not even a competitive election, we're going to have a hard time turning anybody out to vote this time. People who don't want something have no problem turning out. They're motivated. Anger is a greater motivator than joy at election time. How do the people who support this get their people out?
Well, I think that we have, for lack of a better term, a little bit of a dog and pony show going around, talking to people about the proposition, the benefits of it.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's a difficult situation when water is coming out of your tap. It's when it shuts off that everybody wants to get involved. We have a 50-year water plan, and it is around $53 billion. This $2 billion is good seed money for the $27 billion that is going to be required from the state to get that program going.
It'll be leveraged up to represent the amount of money that the state's going to kick in.
Exactly. So part of it is just educating people, letting them know the issues, what is going on, and then, as Drew said, what the downside is. We have got to let people know that this is a plan. If you look at that 50-year water plan, it's water resources are decreasing, yet consumption will be going up.
And our population is actually growing so quickly, 20 million in 2010, 25 million in 20 million in 2000, 25 million in 2010, maybe 27 million or so now, and yet we don't have more water. Every time one of those 1,000 people a day moves to the state of Texas, which we brag about, understandably, they don't bring more water with them. They just strain the existing resources we have. Representative Springer, on transportation, another big issue that we confronted going in the door, as Representative Frullo says, water is a 50-year, $53 billion problem. By some estimates, transportation in the state is a $400 billion, 20-year problem just to maintain the current roads we have at the current level of congestion, both of those conditions being ridiculous. We need more roads, and we need better roads to move us more efficiently. Population growth is a big factor here as well. You all, again, elected not to spend money out of general revenue, but to take money out of the rainy day fund and to put it on the ballot next November, 2014, and hope that the voters support that. Again, let me ask you, why didn't you all just make the hard call and spend the money out of the budget to fund transportation?
I think, once again, we looked at how much money we have in the rainy day fund. Part of that is we get to set a cap that we don't go below in using money that would be going into the rainy day fund.
That was part of the legislation you passed, was to establish a floor.
This establishes a floor. So I got the conservatives, myself included, happy that we would have a floor that we would not go below. We can sit here and say, how much money do we need to take from the taxpayers just to put into an account?
Right.
Transportation is a core function of government. We need to improve on that. But that is still only, some estimate, only 25% of the solution.
Right.
Next session, we have to take a hard look. It says, how do we improve transportation funding in long-term solve this? Whether it's, my position, one I would like to see us address, and I know that there's others who have done this, in the diversion in the gas tax that goes to education. Education is funded off the formula, not on how many miles we drive. Also taking the sales tax on new cars that we buy and using that for transportation. That way we have enough money. In rural Texas, that means we're doing road overlays and shoulder expansions so we have safe roads to drive on. And as you said, congestion in the cities so that we can alleviate some of the traffic jams.
Right.
Those are where we have to go on that. This year, I just saw the estimate. I think $2.5 billion we're going to be putting into the rainy day fund. We're seeing just a massive boom in the oil and gas industry. We need to be able to say we've got enough money in the oil and in the rainy day fund. Let's use this for core functions of government. That's infrastructure for water, and that's transportation.
Senator Duncan, I don't like to do math particularly. That's why I'm in journalism. But I can do this math. Only a couple of $1 billion against a $400 billion need doesn't seem like very much.
Well, there's always a debate about how much you really need. The question is you've got to start attacking the problem.
Right.
The $2 billion I think that goes in, the estimated.
Yeah, the estimate about $2.4 billion over 2 years.
Whatever it is, it'll change, but it is a start to the problem.
Yep.
A $4 billion problem is solved by starting at least with 1, 2, or 3. You don't solve it all at once anyway.
Yeah.
And you never would want to do that. But I think that addressing it in this way is appropriate because it also allows us for the first time to really evaluate how much money we need in the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
This process will require the legislature to make a decision on that, and it will be based hopefully upon good economic forecasting and things that will help us to be able to plan down the future. So I think that the methodology that we put into this is well thought out.
Right.
And I do believe that it will start attacking the problem. And then next session, we've got to look at issues that will continue to give a revenue stream that will address the congestion and the maintenance.
But back to transportation, Senator Duncan, TxDOT, as you heard this session, is near its capacity in terms of debt. They're almost maxed out in their ability to amass debt. We seem to be moving in a lot of places in the state much more toward toll roads, which drive a lot of people crazy. Our taxes go to pay for roads, and then it feels like we're being double taxed when we have to then pay to use the only roads that can get us from point A to point B, not sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic. There's a discussion about high-speed rail projects possibly being added to the mix as well. I mean, it really feels as if we need a strategic plan here. It's almost not only about how much money we need, but what exactly are going to be the available options, not just for people in the big cities, but as Representative Springer says, all over rural Texas, we have to be sure that we have available options as well.
Well, and I think you're going to have to see the legislature just set aside a lot of issues and sit down and
focus
solve
on possible.
And they're going to be hard decisions.
Yeah.
You can't vote scorecards on these issues. You have to vote on information and what the needs are for your region that you represent, as well as for the state as a whole. Congestion in Dallas affects people in Lubbock. And maintenance and lack of maintenance in West Texas affects people in Dallas, Houston, and others.
All these things are related.
It's a statewide issue. It's a core function. And we're just going to have to, the legislative process is going to have some courage to go through and look at some tough issues.
Representative Frullo, Senator Duncan referred to voting by scorecard, which is kind of code in Austin for making certain that you don't get on the wrong side of an issue and have an outside group basically blast into your district and say, well, this person has not voted the right way. We need to find the challenger for them or oppose them. So that occasionally it's hard to take a vote that you may think is the right vote to take because there could be consequences politically. In this session, we saw something that in all the years I've been watching the Capitol, I'm not sure I've seen. We saw Republicans talking out in the open about tax increases and fee increases, specifically on transportation. We heard the possibility of an increase on the car registration fee. We apparently are 44th of the 50 states in terms of the burden on individual Texans related to the car registration fees. We don't charge all that much compared to other states. We heard your speaker talk about the possibility of raising the fee on renewing driver's license. We heard about the possibility of an increase in the vehicle sales tax. We heard a lot of different plans, again, from Republicans. Should we not be considering, to Senator Duncan's point, as much as the scorecard people don't like it, that maybe we don't have enough revenue to meet all of our ambitious goals for ourselves in a fast-growing state?
Well, I don't know that it, first off, do the scorecards really still happen?
Oh, you know they have.
I want to check see if
you're funning with me. I know that they still happen, and you know that they still happen.
I think that my first statement on that, as far as addressing the scorecards, is there's only one scorecard out there that matters, and that's the ballot box. It's these folks out here that vote what they think of us, what they're doing for us, and that's what I look at.
You feel no pressure from the outside groups?
Well, I wouldn't say you don't feel any pressure, but it's to act on that pressure, and that's what I don't do. And you can look at different scorecards, and
Right.
you're a hero in one and a zero in the next.
Well, so what about the idea of possibly needing new revenue? I know this is the overlay of every legislative session is we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. But the state is fast growing, and on priorities like water and transportation, it just may be that the money is not there unless we look for new acceptable sources of revenue.
Well, I think the first step in that is ending the diversions, which we started this last session, the 400 million, which we ended. We've got to get money going to where it should be going. As Drew said, if you're driving miles on the road, putting gallons in your car, and there's a tax on that, that should be going for that specific purpose that was designated for.
And a quarter of it now goes to education, right? Is that correct?
Correct, right.
So the idea would be no longer have that money going to education.
Right, and then go through the process of figuring out what we need to spend. We also need to figure out, as we do, what's that hierarchy of spending, and work through that and make sure that, is this something that we should be providing as the state, or is it something that a business we should not be in, and going through that route. So I'm not a fan of automatically just going out and raising taxes because that's the easy solution. That's what I'm not for.
Yeah. Representative Springer, this question of diversions is a popular topic in Austin. We're going to stop taking money that's dedicated for one purpose, and we're going to start, we're going to take the money that's being diverted to another purpose and use it for the purpose that it was originally intended. But of course, that's a bit of a pig in a snake. It goes down over here, it comes back over here. You now have a hole that you've created by taking money away from the place to which it was diverted. I remember the governor talking in the State of the State this year about ending the diversion of money that was going to fund DPS. It was supposed to, I believe, go to transportation. And he was saying, well, it's actually going over to DPS. We're going to take that money and put it to its original purpose, transportation. But of course, we're not going to defund DPS. That's correct. So ending diversions is good politics, but in the end, you do still have to find money to replace the money that you're taking away, don't you?
Oh, that's exactly right. And I think that's to John's comment, is that gets you to the point that says, if we're paying for public roads, which I would like to see us do versus toll roads, and we say this does, but it does create that hole. When you take money out of education that was going to education,
right,
that has to be made up with GR. So now we either have to raise revenue, was your question, or I think where John and I are coming at, we have to prioritize our spending and say, what things are core functions of state government that we're going to continue to do, and do we eliminate enough things that says we don't raise taxes, or do we say, no, these are core functions and we do have to raise taxes? I think
at least it's a clear
conversation that you have to have. Yeah. I believe that there's enough things in there that we need to have that we're probably pretty close, that we would drop some of the fluff off, that we would have it and we would stick with the core functions. Right. It would be education. Obviously, we're still in the Medicaid and we're going to have to continue down the Medicaid path. And we don't know what that looks like because we don't know exactly what Obamacare fully implemented will look like in 2 years come next budget.
Well, let me come back to healthcare in a second, because I do think that was an important topic, something that maybe did not get resolved during this session. Mm-hmm. But I want to stay with public education since you brought it up. Senator Duncan brought it up. You all had cut in the previous session, depending upon whether your view of the world is half empty or half full, $4 billion or $5.4 billion. Those are the two numbers bandied about from public education. There were predictions of locusts coming down from the heavens, and we're going to have teachers running around in the street laid off from their jobs like zombies. I mean, the reality is that the impact of the public education cuts of the 2011 session is kind of inconclusive. In some districts, they were problematic cuts. In other districts, not. Yet politically, you all got an earful in the interim. You all came back and bought down those cuts by about $3.5 billion a session. So clearly you all thought that you maybe went a little bit too far in the last session.
Well, I think, anytime you cut that much out of any program, especially a core function like public education, you're going to be criticized, and you have to be concerned because you don't want to fall down on quality. I think that what really happened and what got lost in the conversation was the fact that we were also correcting inequities caused by target revenue hold harmless. In other words, we were taking money from districts that were getting windfalls through through the formula anomaly, and redistributing it to those that weren't getting, that were actually losing money under that phenomenon. So that started last session, and we continued it this session. And part of the money that's in there is for the purpose of narrowing that inequity gap.
Right.
Which should help us with our lawsuits that we're dealing with in Austin.
Still is an active
Primarily.
lawsuit against the state on the funding of public ed. Is $3.5 billion enough? Will you have to come back in and put even more back in the next session?
Well, Judge Dietz would like you to put a whole lot more in.
Well,
but I
Judge
think-
Dietz, in fact, in
but-
the initial ruling, where he found 4 of the 600 school districts that had sued the state, he said that you all may be on the hook for as much as $2,000 per enrolled
And I don't think that's
public
realistic,
school student.
but-
Well, that would be $10 billion a year or $20 billion a biennium. There's no way to get that money without a tax bill.
Well, that just won't, this legislature, you know, if you go back to the 2011 phenomenon where we cut the budget, the doors didn't close. In
Yeah.
fact, a lot of districts gave raises out of fund balances and things like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're closer right now, especially with some of the changes we made in Senate or House Bill 5 and
Right.
some other areas where we have kind of redesigned the way we're going to go about our accountability system as well
Yeah.
as directing kids into careers. So
You feel like you did right by public ed this session?
I think public ed had its best session in a long
In a
time.
long time.
Policy-wise
Yeah.
as well as
As funding.
funding as well.
Representative Frullo, you were in the legislative session in 2011 when the cuts happened. Prior to that session, Texas was 41st out of 50 in per student spending on public education. After the session, after your cuts, we were 49th. Now, there'll be people who will say to you, of course, money is not everything. Money is not everything, because if it were, you would just spend your way to be the best at public education in the country. But money does matter to a large degree, how much we're spending on our kids. Do we need to be concerned right now that we're, even after the $3.5 billion, that we're not spending enough to achieve the goals we have on public ed?
I don't think we need to be. It looks, you know, if you look at the numbers, we're about 4765 at the base level, and it's
Yeah.
going to go up about $200 at the end of 2015. We're going to be a little over $5,000 per student. You know, so money is important, but getting back to the senator mentioning HB 5, I think that we're going to see some great things come out of that, where we have the dual path as far as students that want to go to college have that path. Students that do not want to go to college have another path where they can be
Yeah.
successful. That's important. Ken King had the telelearning bill, where students in Canadian can, as he said, learn Mandarin out of a school in Dallas. There's a lot of things that we can do that won't necessarily cost a lot more money. You know, I think that we need to listen to the teachers, listen to the students. The
Yeah.
big part, we cut testing from 15 tests
To 5.
down to 5 tests.
Right.
So those are all big things. Those things will probably in some cases save us money. So I do not believe that spending more money is the answer. It's actually working together, working with the teachers, the
Right.
teacher groups, the administrators, the parents, and figuring out what is it that we need to do to make that next generation be able to work and be productive.
And Representative Springer, the other part of the education policy work that was done this session was to give parents more choice. Not a voucher program, which some had wanted, but expand the opportunity to take a kid out of a failing public school, move that kid to a school that might be working better for him or her, and also raise the cap on charters, not in an unlimited way, but to give more choice in the charter realm so that parents would be able to have more control over where their kids go to public school. That's
right. You know, we've moved in that direction. I've got 72 school districts in my 22 counties. In most of those, kids can already move from school district to school district. So we've already have some of that moving around from that. I don't have charter schools in my district, so a little tougher for me to address some of those issues. And we talk about what the state spending is on there, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I was in Paducah last week, and you know, we're around $11,000 a kid of what we're going to educate with. You know, part of the problem is we're lumped in with the federal government in some of the rules that we mandate. And when I talk to them, they're saying the cost that we have to run, we see zero benefit out of from the federal government. They're looking at turning back the money to the feds so that we can just sort of say, we'll run our own program.
To avoid having the strings.
To avoid having the strings. We've got to look at the cost side of the ledger as well as the revenue side of the ledger that says, let's get back to these being independent school districts. quit having all the mandates from the feds and the states,
Right.
and look at it from the standpoint of saying, how do we run these schools effectively? Right. It's easy to do more in the rural school settings, I think, sometimes, than maybe in the urban settings. And I think we have to address that from a state perspective. And says one size doesn't fit all. School district with 1,500 kids in rural Texas is immensely different than a school district with 30,000 kids in Austin.
In one of the big cities. To this question of the federal government and strings, Senator Duncan, we found out from the U.S. Census a couple weeks ago that we are again first in the nation in the number of our citizens uninsured. This is not one of those we're first things that we like to brag about, I'm afraid. 25% of our population, more than 6 million Texans, have no insurance. This is not counting the underinsured or the underserved. We had the opportunity, as you know, to expand Medicaid and to embrace aspects of the Affordable Care Act. Conservative leadership of the state from the governor on down said we don't want to do that. But yet by the end of the session, what we heard was what people were against. We didn't hear what people were for. And so my question is, can you tell me, in the absence of expanding Medicaid or the absence of embracing the Affordable Care Act, what the legislature can proactively do to address the problem of a quarter of our citizens being uninsured?
Well, I think the biggest problem we have right now in addressing things in the future is the fact that you do have the Affordable Care Act sitting out there. And so the uncertainties that are out there make it almost impossible for policymakers at the local level and state level to be able to say, look, we're going to have these sorts of programs that will basically, and we were working on issues with small businesses, and
Right.
our risk pool was really was functioning fairly well, and ideas that I think Governor Dewhurst had some good ideas with regard to being able to reinsure some of the small business plans, and ideas like that can work better on a state-by-state basis than what we have with expanding Medicaid, which was the biggest concern I think the state had, is that all of a sudden we were going to lock into a federal program that would control our spending like Medicaid does.
Yeah.
And what happens with Medicaid is you get a caseload growth and you've got to pay for it.
Right.
And there are very few opportunities for flexibility in the way states run the plan. If you had a block grant in Texas, I think there would probably, if you could get a waiver and get a block grant, I think you'd have a little different attitude in the state of Texas.
This is the so-called Texas solution, the idea that you
Right.
just give us our money back and let us go and solve the problem. Of course, the thing about expanding Medicaid, Senator, people say it's 100% of funding for the first 3 years. It goes down to 90% from the federal government for a period of time after that. Of course, eventually, we take control of our
Right.
costs. But it's a lot of money that's being left on the table, supporters of this idea say, and yet we've had this problem chronically of being first or near first in the country in the percentage of our folks who are uninsured, and yet we haven't solved the problem to this point. Why not take the money and see if you can't make it work?
Well, I think the problem is once you take the money, you're in,
Yeah.
and you'll never get out.
Right.
It's Hotel California all over.
Right.
You really get hung into that, and
I'm not sure I had thought of it that way. It's a pretty hip reference, I have to say.
But seriously, and I think that's the hesitancy that we've had. If you get into a block grant program where you're able to craft a program that works for Texas, and
Right.
we're so culturally, medically diverse
Yeah.
in this state. We speak English in different ways in
Yeah.
Texas. It's just a different,
Right.
and we have different problems down in the valley, in Houston. We put a lot of resources into public health with regard to our medical schools,
Right.
and quite frankly, I know there are a lot of people. We have a high number of uninsured, but we also have a lot of access to health care in this state through our different hospitals, hospital districts,
Right.
and it's not the most efficient way, but I think bottom line is people can get health care in Texas if they need it.
Right. Well, Representative Frullo, to that point, what you'll hear people in the medical profession tell you is, yes, somebody can walk into an emergency room and get primary care if they need it in the absence of insurance, but it's the most expensive, least efficient form of care, and we all pay for it through property taxes. Those uncompensated care costs go up pretty significantly. So while Senator Duncan is undeniably right that there is a mechanism to get health care if you don't have insurance in the state, it would be better to have something that didn't cost as much and was more efficient.
I agree, and what would even be better is for us in Texas to be able to figure out how to administer that system. Right now, still with the federal monies coming in, we're tied to federal rules on that. There are things that we would like to do in this state that we can't because we are taking that those federal dollars and we are subject to their rules. So I think that we need to, there again, the block grant, being able to administer that for Texas is the way to go. You know, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier was the $3.5 billion that we added to education. Kind of the elephant in the room, and that's not just a Republican reference there, is the $5 billion that was added to Health and Human Services. A lot of that growth right there, that's kind of quietly being said. But we as a state have had to add that much money primarily because of the plans that are put in place through the federal government.
Cost of health care in this state is rising to meet or maybe go past Senator Duncan, public education, right, as a percentage of the unrestricted portion of the budget. Representative Springer, we've heard a lot about strings. It seems to me that in Texas, we don't like some strings, but we do like other strings. And in fact, we have our own strings that we provide to local communities. Everything has strings. Any money we get from the federal government has strings. And oh, by the way, when we provide money to communities like this one, to counties and cities, the state has strings. Strings are part of getting money. So why should we be afraid of strings?
Yeah, there's without a doubt, he who has the gold makes the rules, and so we come up with those. We turn back though to the way the founders saw it. The power should be within the states to sort of set up that parameter so we know what works. From the medical perspective, why do we want to see that? Because I think if we built our own system, we would see a stair-step approach to where maybe we insured people even at a higher rate of income, but they didn't get as much benefits. We would see co-pays, even as little as $1 or $5 for somebody walking into. That's not allowed right now. There's all sorts of research that shows where that drives down cost, gets you in the right behavior. Those are the things that we want to see come. Do we see it from the state perspective when we turn back to the counties and the cities and say, this is the why we think what makes Texas great, and the Texas model, as General Abbott likes to say sometimes? Absolutely. We think that this is what makes Texas unique, different from California, different from New York. We want to see those things. And so, yes, there are times that we do have strings attached to our dollars.
So the fact, Representative Springer, that other good governors, Republican governors like Rick Scott in Florida, Rick Snyder in Michigan, Brian Sandoval in Nevada, Jan Brewer in Arizona, Chris Christie in New Jersey. I guess he'd probably be considered a Democrat in Texas. But a lot of other Republican governors have decided that the money is too important and that it would be too valuable to pass it up. That doesn't move you to think that maybe we need to move a little closer to finding a deal here?
I said, I think earlier on is, we need to see what this is going to look like in 2 years. It hasn't fully rolled out. We don't know where
it's been kind of a mess so far.
Where we're going on with it. And so I think we may be wise that we have waited to see where we go in this. Let us get further down the road. Maybe it will be something. But at the end of the day, who's paying that? Last time I checked, I think we're at $17 trillion now in debt. So, at the end of the day, who is paying for all that money to come back? It's yet us in this room. From a standpoint, borrowing money from the Chinese is not the right way to continue to figure out how we're going to insure. We've got to come up with a plan that works for the entire nation. And just jumping on a sinking ship, I don't know if that's the right answer.
Can I add to that?
You may, Senator. Yes, of course.
I think it's a good observation. I think also every once in a while, and if you recall before the Supreme Court decision came out, most Republican governors were pretty pro going into the lawsuit, trying to defeat the state mandate. They won that. But when they won that, the political pressure came in from those who received the money, from the healthcare industry, and from the different advocacy groups that are involved in the healthcare industry to take the money. Now, every once in a while, I think leadership requires for you to step back a little bit and look down the road, 10, 5 years. The hardest thing in politics to do is to make a decision that has a 5 or 10 year window on it, because it's not popular and it gets you a lot of criticism. But I think Texas has done the right thing by stepping back. And if you could work through the process depending on changes in leadership, changes in Congress, changes in administration, to at least ultimately get some sort of a block grant program where we could apply this additional revenue that the feds are going to be providing in a way that meets the Texas need. Well, then that works. But to just jump in there because we're getting a lot of heat from constituents or getting a lot of pressure from those who are going to get the money, to me seems to be an unwise way to go.
That's not leadership.
Well, I think that's right.
We're going to open it up to the audience for questions here in a second, and let me encourage people to get up now and line up by the two microphones so we can bring you into the conversation. A small question or two about politics rather than issues before we open it up to the audience. Representative, you're running for re-election again?
I am.
Representative, you're running for re-election again? Yes. Senator?
Got a 4-year term.
You have a 4-year term. You don't have to run again. Will you serve out your 4-year term?
Well, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Well, I surely don't know. I figured you probably would know. Would you be open to entertaining a job that might keep you on this campus more frequently?
Well, I don't know. We've got a great chancellor right now.
Yes, but
Chancellor Emeritus, and has done a great job for the state of Texas.
But as you said, it's important to look down the road. Did you not just say that? Come next summer.
You got to have a car to do it.
Come next summer, the chancellor will not be the chancellor anymore, he's told us. Do you have an interest in possibly taking that job?
Well, I think the Board of Regents first need to decide what they want, what direction they want to take with the chancellorship. The chancellorship has been great for Texas Tech, starting with John Monford,
most definitely,
who made Tech believe in itself. David Smith, who added a lot of different dimensions to the program, and then you had Ken Hance, who blew the top off of it. By every measure of a chancellor, you couldn't find a better performance. So the board needs to decide where they want to go with that, and then they need to decide who they want to look at.
Right.
And then if they want to interview folks, well, then they'll invite that, and certainly that's how that process will work.
Of course, you could end the speculation by saying now that you don't want the job.
I guess you're right.
Yeah. Okay. I tried.
I wore my red tie. I thought I might get an offer.
Yeah. All right.